Like the famous Yeti that supposedly inhabits the Himalayan Mountain Range, or the famous Bigfoot in the forests of North America, in Scotland there is a terrifying report of a huge dark figure that is said to menace people who dare to venture to the highland summit of Ben MacDhui, the second highest peak in the British Isles after Ben Nevis. People have reported to have had many encounters with what had been named the Am Fear Liath Mor, or the Big Grey Man. It is reported to be very thin and over 10 feet tall, with dark skin and hair, with long arms and broad shoulders. The creature not only threatens with a force of physical power, but people who have encountered it claim to feel a sense of suicide, depression and overall panic. Ben MacDhui stands at approximately 1,220 metres in height and is both an imposing sight as well as a challenge to any experienced mountaineers. The creature appears to reside in the fog of the mountain, where the people that have encountered it hear the sound of crunching gravel walking behind them, leaving them with a sense of dread and unease. The first reported account of the large grey man came from a professor called John Norman Colley, an English scientist and a member of the Royal Geographical Society and a hiker. As a young man in 1891, Professor Colley claimed to have had a terrifying experience while hiking alone close to the summit of Ben MacDhui. He said that as he was returning from the summit, it was extremely misty. He could hear the sound of crunching footsteps. At first he believed that the gravelly sounds must have been an echo of his own footsteps, but then came to the realization that the noises were not corresponding to the movements he was making, and were definitely other than his own. Every step that he took was followed by steps behind him. What was most terrifying was that not only was something following him, but they were taking steps 3 or 4 times the lengths of his own. He tried to shake off his fear, telling himself that it was all nonsense, but the eerie crushing continued behind him, and he was suddenly seized with terror and started blindly running around boulders. And what made matters worse was he could see nothing in the mist. He ran for 5 miles until he reached Rothmerker's forest. He later told others that there was something very queer about the top of Ben MacDhui, and to his dying day swore that he would never return there. Professor Colley's frightening encounter reached the local newspapers and stirred debate within the community, where other hikers came forward with their own encounters, which they had initially been afraid to discuss for fear of being mocked. One such climber was a man called Hugh Welsh, who claimed that he'd been on the summit of Ben MacDhui in 1904 with his brother, and similar to Professor Colley, they could hear crunching footsteps that sounded like someone or something walking through water-saturated gravel. Both he and his brother were conscious that something was near them, leaving them with an eerie sense of apprehension. Many years later, in 1945, a man called Peter Densham was taking part in rescue work on the Cairngorm Plateau that was close to Ben MacDhui during World War II. His job was to locate and save any pilots that had crashed on the mountain. As was normally the case, the weather was misty, and Peter Densham started to hear strange noises, and then felt increasing pressure around his neck. He did not hang around long enough to see what it was, and fled in fear back down the mountain, dangerously close to the cliff edge. He later said that it felt like someone was pushing him, and as he was running, he tried to change course, but with a great deal of effort. In 1948, a friend of Peter Densham called Richard Freer had also been on the summit and described that he felt a presence close by that was both abstract but powerfully real, and he could hear an intensely high singing note. A mutual friend of Freer also described an encounter it had, but chose to remain anonymous. He claimed that whilst camping on Ben MacDhui, he suddenly woke up feeling an inescapable feeling of dread. He then looked out of his tent and saw a large figure silhouetted against the moon. In 1958, a mountaineer and naturalist by the name of Alexander Tunian wrote an article in the Scots magazine about an encounter he'd had with the Grey Man back in 1943. He was hiking alone in the Cairngorm Plateau, and just as he was approaching the summit cairn of Ben MacDhui, a mist suddenly appeared out of nowhere and completely enveloped the mountain. The atmosphere started to feel dark and oppressive. Then a freezing wind blew amongst the boulders, followed by a strange sound that echoed through the mist. He then heard a loud footstep, followed by another loud footstep. As if that was not terrifying enough, a weird shape appeared out of the mist and began to charge at him. Tunian quickly grabbed his revolver and fired 3 times at the dark figure charging at him. The 3 shots failed to deter the dark shape, which Union quickly turned on his heels down the track at the speed of lightning until he reached Glenderry. Although Alexander Tunan had previously heard the legend of the large grey man, he was now certain that he had seen it. In the early 1990s, and approximately 95 kilometres from Ben MacDhui, 3 men were walking in a forest just outside Aberdeen and spotted a human figure running a short distance in front of them. What they saw was not only strange, but his face was not quite human. A few weeks later, the same 3 men were in the same area, but on this occasion were driving, and could see a tall dark creature following them. They decided to accelerate to outpace the creature, but even when they had reached the speed of 45 miles per hour, it was still on their tail, but suddenly tired and stopped. The men all felt a sense of terror and foreboding, just like the mountaineers had previously felt. Strangely though, in over 100 years, no photographs have ever been taken of the actual creature, but many have heard it and felt its terrifying presence.